Right after God shuts down the spiritual portal at Babel, God calls Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. And there are several details you really need to recognize or you'll miss the gold in this passage. For example, Abram does something very odd here, and we have to ask, why does he do this? And there's one specific thing that God tells Abraham that might actually give us a deeper understanding of the gospel. If you want to learn how to read the Bible, you are in the right place. Let's jump into Genesis chapter 12. Genesis 12, starting in verse 3. It says, I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So look at all the things that God is doing. God says, I will bless you. I will make your name great. You will be a blessing because of the fact that God has made his name great. God says, I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those, and in your name and lineage all the families of the earth will be blessed. There's a lot of things God does in this passage. But to summarize, Genesis chapter 12, after Abram or Abraham, depending on how you want to refer to him, when he leaves his homeland of Babylon, God ends up calling him out of Haran to pack up everything, to go to a land that Abraham's never been to. And so God promises Abram blessing, a future, a nation, a name, a house, and land. And Abram obeys God, but ends up bringing Lot with him. Abram stops at two sacred locations to worship God, and then a famine drives Abram and his household to the land of Egypt, where he deceives Pharaoh. And then he's sent away. And so if I were to use two words to capture this chapter, I would just use the two words, called out. Abram is called out. 4 words to look for: blessing, land, wife or woman, and then house. When God tells Abram in verse 2, back it up a little bit, when he says that I'll make of you a great nation and I will bless you, this is all that God is going to do just per his grace and per his compassion and mercy. He reaches down, finds Abram and goes, I'll bless you. I'll make your name great so that you will be a blessing. Apparently, Abram cannot be a blessing unless his name is first made great. In other words, what it means for Abram's name to be great is that he is a blessing to others. His greatness doesn't terminate on himself. It's not centered around him, but it's actually centered around others. It's others-focused and others-oriented. So Abram is blessed to be a blessing. And God doesn't say Abram is blessed, but he will be blessed. He says, I will bless you. I will make your name great. And once that's his condition, he and his descendants will be able to be a blessing to the rest of the nations. And this is why, just to draw a little application out of this is why God first makes us blessed in Christ through faith. Because we cannot be a true benefit and blessing to others unless we're first blessed ourselves in Christ to be that blessing. So notice the connection between house and blessing and name and nations, all right here jam-packed in this little section of God speaking to Abram. This right here is what spells out the gospel for me. When you look at the house, the nation, in fact, let me just back it up to show you what I mean. Right before God tells Abram what he's going to do with him, he says, Abram, I need you to leave a few things behind. Leave your country, which is why God's going to give him new land. Leave your kindred, which is why God is going to give Abram his own family and nation. Leave your father's house, which is why God is going to give him a new name and make a great name of him. And then he says, go to the land I'll show you. I'll make of you what? A great nation. I'll bless you, make your name great so that you'll be a blessing. So this is about descendants and land and lineage and nation and all that stuff. But I lost my place. Abram is blessed to be the blessing, just as we are in Christ. And Galatians chapter 3, verse 8 actually tells us, weirdly enough, and I never understood why, but Galatians 3:8 says that God preached the gospel to Abram when God told Abraham that in you all the nations will be blessed. And so the gospel, seemingly in its most basic form, the good news that God brings is that the Gentiles can be justified by faith alongside the descendants of Abram. It's Jew and Gentile, saved through faith, justification. It's a gift of God's grace. So throughout the biblical story, we've already seen God invite people into his blessing. So when God says, look, I will bless you so you can be a blessing, time and time again, God's already extended that to so many people. He blesses humanity in Genesis 1 and 2. He blesses them again in Genesis 8 when they come out of the ark, Noah and his family in the new world. But people often don't want the blessing of God. People want their own definition of blessing and abundance, and they want it on their own terms and in their own timing. But blessing comes from God alone. True blessing is defined by him alone. And the spiritual condition of blessing and the reality of blessing It's something that's granted by God alone. It's bestowed. It's not earned, it's not achieved, it's not produced by human efforts, like we see the people at Babel trying to ascend to the place of blessing and favor that only God can grant someone. This is our position in Christ, that God so graciously gives us this free, undeserved gift of being blessed and having this spiritual condition of his favor, just because of the fact that we descend from Abraham spiritually and are grafted into Christ through faith. And in Genesis 3, mankind essentially wanted this, and this is the power grab. Humanity's always overreaching. So they wanted to know good and evil in the garden, just like God. They wanted to be like God. They wanted to be their own gods, and in that sense, they wanted their own name to be made great. Contrasted with God saying, Abram, I am going to make your name great. In Genesis 4, we see that same kind of power grab, where Cain wanted that same favor and acceptance for his own name that Abel had, and he has this jealousy towards Abel. And a great name is not a bad thing, but we have to let God handle our reputation. We have to trust him with our reputation as we just do what he says. And a great name and a great reputation cannot become our ultimate priority and take the place of God as if to be some kind of idol. It cannot come at the expense of obedience to God. It cannot become our greatest pursuit. It must be given by God and not achieved by man. And then verse 3, God says, I will actually bless those who bless you. And then the person who dishonors you, Abram, I will curse. And in you, I think this phrase is key, just like we see that phrase throughout Genesis 6 through 8, with Noah, the people being with Noah. This phrase being in Abraham. All the families of the earth shall be blessed. And we know that blessing is extended in Christ Jesus. So the families and the nations of the earth. I want us to think about this. God made the nations from the Tower of Babel and that event. When he sent them away, he didn't intend to leave them in that condition. He actually intended to work with one chosen, blessed individual, Abram, to bring God's blessing to those nations and to those tribes and tongues across the earth. And this is what God does with Noah. God chose one to be a blessing to those who would be attached to him, right? Noah's the one that you attach yourself to be in the ark with him. And these nations of the earth that come from Noah are going to be blessed through Abram. So in other words, God isn't sending the nations into exile with no hope of return after the Tower of Babel. He's sending them across the land to fulfill his plan of bringing them blessing through this man Abram and his descendants. And this is not God choosing one at the expense of the rest. This is God choosing one for the benefit of the rest, who are in a kind of exile at the moment after being, dispersed across the earth. And when God brings us into the light, he actually intends to send us into the darkness with his blessing, with his love, and to bring others into the light that we now have in Christ. And the whole idea of blessing and cursing is kind of odd. Just as it's placed right here in this little speech to Abram. We've seen blessing throughout the story already. We've seen cursing several times already. Genesis chapter 3, God curses the serpent. Then God curses the ground for Adam's sin. Genesis chapter 4, God curses Cain for killing Abel. And with each of these curses, it speaks of their condition and their activity. So the serpent is going to be crushed and brought low. The ground won't produce and will be contrary to Adam. Won't work with him. Cain will be a wanderer. So you notice the activity and the condition that they're in. And then in Genesis chapter 9, Noah will curse his grandson because Noah was violated by his son Ham or Ham. And then Canaan and his line are destined to be of low status and live as servants to the other brothers. And all of that context of cursing should really help us understand what it means for God to curse the enemies of Abraham. And then within this is actually a glimpse into the gospel. Ultimately, Jesus is the true offspring of Abraham who brings God's blessing to the world and the nations. And all of the enemies of Jesus will be crushed along with the serpent that they follow and give their allegiance to. So this is not just talking about Abram's personal enemies or even Israel's national enemies, but it's the spiritual cosmic enemies of God and his son and his people, as well as any physical creature that would come against Jesus, just like we see in Psalms chapter 2. And so we can trust that God will not only extend blessing to the world through our lives, but that at the right time, when God says now is the right time, God will bring the appropriate curse and judgment upon those who have remained against Jesus in rebellion and unbelief. And it's interesting to note that God actually chooses to bless or curse people based on their relationship to Abram. He says, I will bless those who bless you. So for some reason, whether or not someone is blessed or cursed, it depends on their position or proximity or relationship to Abram and his descendants. If they curse, there is enemies. If they bless, there is friends. And this promise is even more true of Christ. I think this is most realized in Jesus. God blesses those who receive his son. This is all over the Gospel of John. And God curses those who reject his son. And we see a glimpse of this in Numbers chapter 22, when the king of Moab tries to curse the nation of Israel, but they're blessed, so Balaam cannot do that, and the king of Moab cannot do that. And it's better than what Israel had. Now that we're in Christ, we have something better. We're not descendants of Abraham physically, like the nation of Israel, but we are spiritual descendants because we're in Jesus. And because he's the blessed one, we remain in that blessed condition for all eternity through our trust in him, which is what makes our condition and our situation a little different than the nation of Israel. Real quick, if you don't know me, my name is Jason, and I have some free gifts for you at abovereproachministry.com. Go to the website or click the links in the description below to check out all of our free Bible study resources. We have online Bible classes, devotional studies, Bible study workshops, all of my sermon notes, and more. You can even join our online church community on the Discord app. We also have discussion groups all around the world, and if you don't see one in your area, message me and we'll help you start a launch group. I personally lead a group in Spartanburg, South Carolina. If you live in the area, we'd love to have you join us on Fridays for Bible study. So contact me if you're interested, and if you or your church would like me to come preach or teach, just message me or shoot me an email and we'll see what we can do, because I love preaching in person. If you're a new follower of Jesus, click the New Believer section to access everything we recommend for new believers. And be sure to snag a copy of my book, Fruitful, to support this ministry. All right, that's all I got for you. Let's jump back into the video. And if you go to Deuteronomy 11:26, just to cross-reference the blessing and the curse, God sets a blessing and a curse before the people of Israel. And he says if they follow his laws, they'll be blessed. If they disobey his laws, they will be or come under the curse. And what we see is that Jesus ultimately will have to come and be the perfect, blessed human we all failed to be, so that he can graciously take our curse upon himself on the tree in order that we might become blessed children of God and friends of Jesus through his atonement. In other words, the blessing God intends to extend through Abraham and his descendant, Jesus, namely, that has to come by Jesus first taking our curse to replace that curse with blessing. The same idea is in Numbers 22, when God turns the curse into a blessing. That's what he does with his son. And that's what he promises to do with Abram and his descendants. And then the families of the earth are in mind here, which is kind of odd. Right now, the nations of the world are divided after the Tower of Babel. They're separated by language and culture and religion and land. But God finds Abram when the last story is the dividing of the world. And what God plans to do with Abram is use Abram and his descendants, namely Jesus, to unite the world once again under God and under Jesus as the king over all the nations. So he brings true godly unity, God does, but God sets that plan into motion to bring us all back into the garden by choosing this one guy named Abram from Ur of the Chaldeans. And Abram is supposed to be viewed as like another Adam, but now it's in a new and different world. Humanity is in a different condition than when God first made Adam and Eve. And so verse 4, we have Abraham going. He obeys. Abram went as the Lord had told him. And we have this interesting detail, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. So just a few questions about Abram leaving. What did it even mean for Abram to just pick up everything and leave with all of his possessions and family, at least his household? How long had he stayed in Haran before God actually told him to leave? How long did he wait for a word from God? What did he actually expect God was going to do? These are questions that I have. And the reason I ask these things is because this is often what it looks like for obedience in our lives. When we obey God, it'll often look in similar ways to this. We aren't even sure of the next destination sometimes, but God has told us just the next step to take. We don't have all the details. We don't know how it'll work out, but we know he's commanded us to move. And we know that he's told us to listen to his voice. And so faith-filled obedience does not require all the details. We just need to know that God said to do it. And then this interesting detail about Lot going with him. I just want to pause and ask, why are we told specifically that Lot went with him? Obviously, Lot is with him at this point in the story. We know that because of the last chapter. So it seems like unnecessary extra statement about Lot, like just repetitive. But also, Abram was just told to leave his kindred, his father's house, and the country, and that seems to include Lot. If it's assumed that Abram was supposed to take Lot and his wife with him, then I don't know if this extra statement would have needed to be added. This detail sticks out to me as being out of the ordinary, unexpected, and possibly even like a but kind of clause, which notes that, maybe Abram only partially obeyed rather than completely obeying God. In other words, this one small statement that Lot went with him, that will become an incredible issue throughout the rest of the story of Abram and even the rest of the biblical story. When the narrative unfolds, it seems very clear by the time you get just a few chapters in that you're like, I don't believe Abram was supposed to take Lot and his wife. Now you can consider it like an act of charity and love. Well, Lot doesn't have a father, and his father died, Haran, and he has nowhere to go. He could go back to his homeland, but we can defend it all we want. But the idea is, I'm convinced, per the story and where it's going, that Abram was not supposed to take Lot and his wife. And whether or not that's an appropriate conclusion to make, there is application and wisdom in the scriptures that we need to learn how to obey God fully. Not partially, not half-heartedly, not in the areas where we're comfortable, and fully in all things. If it's partial obedience, it's disobedience, like straight up. Half obedience to God leaves an open door for the enemy in our lives, which can end up making our lives much harder than God actually intended for it to be. And then we're told that Abram is 75 when he leaves Haran, which technically is the second place we've seen Abram. He left Ur, now he's in Haran, and he's headed toward Canaan or Canaan. So why are we told how old Abram is when he leaves Haran, but not how old he is when he left Ur? We're not told how old he is when his father died. We're not told how old he is when Lot was born. None of those are reference points for Abram's life. We have no previous time markers for Abram's life until now. And I think what the narrative is implying is that this is the very moment where everything changes for Abram. His new life and his story officially begins now, with God kind of writing this new chapter in the scriptures. Everything up till now seems to be viewed as just a kind of old life. All the preparation, all the things being put in place, kind of like how Moses is called at 80 years old, being a shepherd out there and with Jethro in Midian, and God calls him from the flaming bush, and we're like, wow, he's 80. Why does God call him now? I think this is a very similar moment where God works with each different person on his own different time frame. And there's a different clock and a different, set of expectations with each person's life that God works with. So we're going to jump into verse 5 in the next Bible study, walk through. That will be a fun one because of where Abram actually ends up. It's very fascinating, the stops that he makes along the way to Canaan and why he ends up there and what he's doing. So I'll see you guys in the next Bible study walkthrough. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts, your comments in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next Bible study walkthrough. Hey, thanks for watching. Don't forget to share your thoughts and your insights in the comments. If you want to share your thoughts and questions about these studies, join us every Thursday evening at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for a live discussion together. And thank you for supporting this ministry. Your support helps us accomplish our mission, which is to teach people how to read the Bible so they can live and teach it for themselves. We're only able to make all of these free resources because of generous supporters like you. So thank you very much for all of your support. Make sure to visit abovereproachministry.com to check out all of our free resources. And as always, keep moving towards Jesus.